Hi, Amanda here with DevExpress. I'd like to introduce DevExpress MVPs and XAF veterans Dave Hesketh and Adam Latimer. In this video, they'll build a CRM application from scratch using our Express app framework.
Welcome to Getting Started with XAF. I'm Dave Hesketh and I'm joined here today with Adam Latimer. We are both 10+ year veterans with XAF. Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about XAF and who it's designed for?
I'd love to, Dave. XAF is for developers who have a solid foundation in the .NET framework. You should be comfortable with C# or VB.NET and general programming concepts. It's intended to create small to medium enterprise applications, which are about 1 to 100 users, and it is not designed to create the next social media platform. Dave, how does XAF compare to the other options?
Yeah, so there's basically 3 scenarios that we see. The first is to adopt a universal software product.
Like Dynamics CRM?
Yeah, so you can take something like Dynamics, put it in place, do a little bit of customization, and hopefully it fits your needs. In a lot of cases, you're limited by that customization, so you have to make the decision to create some custom software. And your options there are to either create custom software from scratch, which is time consuming and you have to do all the mundane work, or you use a framework which takes care of the mundane work for you.
So we've chosen XAF as our framework. As you can see in this architecture diagram, XAF is split into 2 major layers, the storage layer and the application layer. The storage layer allows us to choose between 2 ORM tools, Entity Framework or the Express Persistent Objects known as XPO. XPO is actually a free ORM tool that is outperforming Entity Framework, so we suggest that you use it. XAF was also originally designed to work with XPO, and the Entity Framework support was added later on. Within the storage layer, there are some built-in business objects that you can use or extend as part of the business class library. Normally you will be creating your own business classes, but the defaults are there if you choose to use them.
So in the application layer, we have a few components. The first is the UI, which you can see at the top. This can be a Windows Forms, ASP.NET Web Forms, or mobile application. Below that, we have our application controllers. The built-in controller library is what takes care of the normal mundane work. Things like generating the layout and creating all of the actions that are needed to work with your business objects. You will then create your own controllers that can interact with these existing controllers and actions or are completely independent. Finally, the application model is shown on the right. All information used to generate the UI comes from the model. The model is assembled from the metadata, and then different layers are applied to it to generate the final model. While the model files are mainly XML files, DevExpress has created an easy-to-use model editor for quick customization of your application.
Now we'll jump into Visual Studio and create a new XAF solution. Alright, now that we're in Visual Studio, we're going to go ahead and create a new solution. And XAF provides you with a Solution Wizard that we're going to use. And we're going to do a starter CRM. So on the first page of the wizard here, you've got the different platforms that are offered to you through XAF. We're going to use just the Windows and Web. On the next page here, you choose your ORM. So as we mentioned before, the XPO objects are the ones that we recommend, and it's what we're going to use in this example. So on this page, you can choose your security strategy. You can go with either none, standard, which is just a username and password, or use your Active Directory Windows account. For this example, though, we're just going to use none. On the last page here, you can choose from all of the extra modules that XAF provides. So you can see that there's clone object, we're going to use Conditional Appearance, there's also file attachments, maps, pivot grids, but we're going to use the scheduler and validation as well. And you can see for some of the modules that you select, there's additional settings here on the right. So we're going to go ahead and click Finish, and it's going to create our solution for us. Alright, so now that our solution's created, you can see that XAF gives you a starter page here with links that new XAF developers should definitely check out. On the right hand side, you can see that it's created 5 projects for us. So you've got your .win, which is a standard Windows form application, your .web, which is a standard ASP.NET web form application, your Windows and web specific projects, and then you also have a .module, which is your platform agnostic project that will be used in both your web and Windows applications. So we want to be doing most of our work in our .module because that will go into both the web and .win. And we're going to start with just creating a new company object. So I'm going to right click and do add DevExpress item and then new item. And this brings up the DevExpress template gallery. So as you can see here, you can create different types of business objects, controllers, and templates. So as we discussed before, we're going to be using XPO. So we'll create a new one called company. I'm going to spell it correctly. There we go. And you can see when you create the new object, it leaves in a lot of comments that you can use. That just help you get started. But in our case, we're just going to remove them to keep it a bit cleaner. And we're going to go ahead and start adding in new properties here. So you can see that we're using snippets that we've created, and it just helps us input the properties quicker. Dave, do you want to go through what the format of the properties are?
Yeah, so you'll notice that we use the snippets that we've created for ourselves, and we've been using these for a long time. You can also check out the Code Rush shortcuts from DevExpress. If you have the Code Rush product installed, they're also extremely useful. In terms of the properties that Adam's actually creating here, you'll notice that all of the setters have this set property value method that's being called in the background. And what that does is it notifies the application that a change has been made to that property. So it's actually using that notifications interface to let the application know that, hey, something has changed, and you should enable things like the save action. It also tells other properties that they've been updated. So if you have logic that is conditional based on those, they're updated as well.
Yeah, exactly. So now that we've got our company here, all I need to do is I'm going to go into our .win project, open up the app config, and just modify the connection string here to point to my local database.
So with the use of XPO, there are, I believe, 14 different database providers that are supported, and it's as simple as changing that connection string to start working with that database provider. I believe some of them need a database driver potentially, but other than that, it is just a connection string change.
Perfect. And you can also see the easy test connection string above it. This is the testing framework that's built into XAF, but it's outside of the scope of this session, but it is something that you can check out if you're interested in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start the project, and it's going to take a little bit to start up for the first time.
Yeah, so during the first startup, the metadata is collected to generate that default model. So that takes a little bit of time. Also, our database is now being created in the background, and this is the bonus of using an ORM tool like XPO or Entity Framework. You don't have to go and manually create those databases. It's generating automatically in the background. There is, it's not a magic tool. You do have to get in there and do a bit of database maintenance yourself. So if you add a field and then change the type, you may have to go back and do that yourself if you're working with an existing database. Or if you're actually creating your business objects from an existing database, you may have to tweak the database at that point as well.
Right. So now that the application's loaded up, you can see what just the default XAF layout looks like. So on the left here, you've got your navigation items. At the top, you've got a ribbon similar to your Microsoft products. And here what we're looking at is the list view of companies. So we don't have any, so I'm going to create one now. And now the view that this brings up is what's called a detail view. So it's the view of a single company. So we'll just go ahead and add in some details. The billing address. Okay, and then we'll just use the save and close, which will commit that object to the database, close down the view, and bring us back to the company list view. So right now, it's pretty dull. We've just got the one company in here. So we can go back into the code and add a new object for this.
Yeah, so maybe company contact would make the most sense at this point.
Yeah. So again, we're doing new DevExpress item using the XPO business object, and it's going to be company contact. So another thing that you can see, that it automatically gives the default class options attribute to the class. So this enables the object to be reportable, so it'll show up in the list of objects when you're creating a report. It also allows it to be visible in the dashboards. It creates a navigation item for it, and it also allows the creatable item status. And what that means is that regardless of what view you're on, the drop-down of the new action will contain this object. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my properties in here.
Now you'll notice when Adam's putting names in, both on the business object side and on the property side, naming is really important. So we suggest that when you're creating a business object, you use the singular version of it, so company versus companies, and company contact. Then within your properties, as you're creating your company's collection of contacts, then you would use the plural version. Also, you'll notice that the capitalization is important. So when we're using things like ship to billing, everywhere we want a space in our caption by default, we want to put a new capital letter. So it's going to split out ship space to space billing. XAF takes care of that automatically, so you don't have to go and change all your captions everywhere. You can update your captions to do whatever you want, but it takes a lot of the work out of it for you.
So now what we have is a company and a company contact object. What we want to do is link those together so that a company contact will be a part of a company, and a company has a list of company contacts. So we're going to again use one of our snippets here. We're going to use the manymaster no link. There's going to be a company contact and a list of contacts. So you can see here that we're using the XP collection, which is the XPO implementation of a list. And now that we've got the association on one side, we need to go over into the contact side and do another association. So in this case, we want just one company called company. And you can see that both of the properties that I just created have the association attribute. And XAF will know that based on the types that they're associated to each other. So we'll go ahead and just run this again. You can see the difference. Alright, so again, because of the default class options, you can see that company contact now has its own navigation item with ListView. And if we actually open up our company, you can see that XAF has automatically added the new contacts property to the list, and based on the association, it knows that this is a list of contacts. So if I create a new one here, just add myself in. Alright, so I'm just going to add a second contact here as well. I'll add Dave in here. I'll do save and close, and then just save and close for the whole company. So you can see in the navigation that we have the scheduler event. So this was put in here automatically because I added the scheduler module when we were first creating the solution. And since we want to add a company and company contact to it, we're just going to extend the event class, which is part of the default business library. So to do that, we're just, again, going to create a new DevExpress item. We're going to call this meeting. So instead of using base object, we are going to use event. So Dave, do you want to tell them a bit about what the base object is?
Yeah, so the base object is the XAF implementation of an XPO persistent object. In reality, you can use any of the XPO persistent class types as your base. Because meeting and basically all of the default objects that are part of that business class library already extend that base object, we're just layering on top of that by extending from event. Noticing that event is not the same as a .NET event, it is just a business object called event.
Right. So what we have here, we're just going to add a company and a primary contact. But since we want to restrict the primary contact to a contact that actually exists on the company that we've selected, what we're going to use is a data source property. And in this case, we want to do the company.contacts. So that's the list that we're going to allow them to select from. Another thing that we want to do here is add an attribute called map inheritance. And we're going to do map inheritance.table. So what this does is instead of creating a meeting table in SQL, it's just going to put everything into the event table. Normally, if you didn't do this, you would have an event and a meeting table, and they would have the same OIDs for the same object, which would allow them to join together properly.
We should say that the OID is part of that base object implementation. It's the key for the table. It is a GUID normally. In that base object, it's a GUID. If you're using a different base object type, you can get an integer.
Right.
Okay, so before we actually get into the new meeting type, let's just create a separate company so we can have a separate list of contacts. That will really demonstrate the data source property attribute. And the attributes that you apply to both business objects as a whole, so the classes or their properties, have a huge impact on the way the application works, and we'll get more into that shortly. So we've added Bob into Google. Add one more.
Alright, so now we've got our meeting in the navigation panel over here. And we can go ahead, select a time slot, and right-click for a new appointment. And now you can see that we've added our company and primary contact. So if I pick DevExpress, I can only select a contact from that company, so Adam or Dave. And if I switch over to Google, it changes the data source of this list to only be Bob and Frank. So you can see that this view has been created based on the event class, but also the properties that we added to ours. And it could definitely look better. So why don't we go into the model file and update this to look a bit cleaner.
So again, these views are generated based on that metadata coming through from those persistent types, the meeting and then our the event that we were extending from. And so it does its best guess to generate that layout, but in reality, you are expected to get in here and modify those layouts so that they are customized to look the way you want. This is a very different concept from what most developers are used to, where they're dragging and dropping controls onto forms and doing all their own data binding. There's no need to do that because XAF does that for you.
Right. And you can see here that I've opened up the .module model file. So this means that any changes that I make here will be reflected in both the Windows and web application. And when you open this up, you can see all of the different nodes that are available to you. So your BO model, which is going to be all of your business objects, your navigation items if you want to change the order or add or delete some. And then you also have your views, which is where we're going to do the modification of that meeting view.
Now right now all the business objects are grouped by their namespace. You have the option to actually right click on that views node and say ungroup, and it will be in alphabetical order. Sometimes it's a little easier to find things that way. Mm-hmm. So now Adam's just dragging and dropping these properties wherever we want them to appear. And the really cool part of this layout tool is that you can create tabs, you can create separate groupings, multi-column layouts. It's really quite flexible.
Yeah, I think pretty good. And so while we're here as well, I will go into the navigation items. What I want to do is just remove that scheduler event item. So I'm just going to right click and delete it here. So since we've implemented our own, there's no need for both of them to show in the application. All right, so since we had the meeting open last, it's what's opened up again. And you can see that it's significantly cleaner than it was before. There's a couple defaults actually that we haven't enabled. So I'd like to see some icons in the tabs and also in the navigation. So we can show you where to add those in as well. Okay, so for those items, they're actually going to be .win specific. So we'll come into the .win project, open up the model file, and under navigation items, we want to change this to show images true. And under the options, we want show tab image also set to true. Save that and start up the application. So you can see that in the tabs at the top and in the navigation, there's icons. So meeting already has a different icon because we're implementing the event object, which already has its own icon. But every one that you create by default will have the normal XAF logo, and you can change that in the model file. All right, so let's go ahead and actually add an icon to our company contact. So you could do that in the model file. So it would be under the BO model and then company contact. And over here you have the image name, which by default is set to the BO_unknown. But let's actually go right into the company contact. At the top, we can add an attribute called image name.
So attributes are an extremely powerful way to customize the application without actually writing any new code, essentially. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're utilizing the pieces that are there. There's a ton of attributes you can use, again, that can live on the business object or live on the object properties. So image name is a good one. We talked about the default class options and all the pieces it does. If you go back down to where we had done the contacts list and the company, we have the association attribute, which basically links two object types together. We also have that aggregated attribute, which normally when you create an association, you can actually link and unlink objects from other objects. So you could click the link action and steal a contact from a different company. The aggregated basically says, no, this is my list of contacts. You're not allowed to pick from that pool. So that link and unlink action become unavailable and don't even show up.
Right. So I just wanted to open this up again so you can see now that our company contact does have that BO lead image. But I also wanted to show that on the meeting, our primary contact here, it's just using first name by default. So what we want to do is actually set what's called a default property so that in this list it shows the full name instead of just the first name. So on the company contact, I'm going to add a new calculated property. It's just going to be public string full name. We're going to return object formatter format. First name space last name. I'm going to do that on this object. Alright, and so we're going to use some more attributes here. So we're going to do visible in detail view false and visible in list view false. So as you've seen, as we add properties into these objects, when you open up a list view or a detail view, they're automatically added. In this case, we don't want that. So we're just going to put them to false in this attribute.
So these attributes are always taken into consideration as part of that metadata to generate that base model. So this is a really good example of that. When something like visible in list view is defined on the property, when it does that generation, it takes that into consideration and doesn't include it.
Right. Along the same line with the attributes, There's also validation that we can add through attributes. So when we first created the solution, we added the validation along with the conditional appearance module. So on the company, what I want to do is add the rule required field and also the rule unique value. So what these attributes do, the first one, rule required field, makes sure that you can't save a company unless you've filled in some value for company name. And the rule unique value means that you can't have two companies that have the exact same company name. So we can go ahead and run that. So in the meeting, you can see that now the contact is showing the full calculated name that we created.
And that was because you defined that default property attribute at the top.
Exactly, yep. And then now if we go over to our company list and I try to create a new one, you'll see that right away it's got the asterisk beside the company name, which marks that it's required. So if I try and save here, your validation rule will pop up saying that the company name must not be empty. And if I fill in Google and save it, we get a different validation error now saying that the company name values must be unique.
Now these are two very straightforward validation examples. You can have very complex examples where, if one property is filled in, the other property also needs to be filled in. The level of complexity you can get is infinitely complex. It doesn't, you're not limited by a whole lot. So.
Right. So like I mentioned, we also added the conditional appearance module. So what we're going to do is create a conditional appearance rule that when we check off the ship to billing, it just removes the shipping address from here because instead you're just going to be using billing. And we'll do another one that runs when your contact is active. I'll have to actually add that property in, that it just bolds the properties for it. So again, this could be done in the model file, but we're just going to use the attributes.
Do you want to show where it is in the model file just so they get an idea?
Yeah, let's do that.
So again, we're going into the dot module. We want to do as much in the dot module as possible. Earlier, we opened up the .win model file to change a couple of the image options. But yeah, always make sure you're working at the kind of the lowest level you can. So the platform agnostic, where if you have to get into the Windows or web specific because it's platform dependent, then go into those models. But yeah, always try to do it in agnostic if you can.
Explain how they stack, actually.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the model file again is generated using that metadata to put those defaults together. So that gives us our base model. That's actually compiled down into a little DLL assembly. These model files are then layered on top. So the changes that you put in the dot module are applied first. So we take that default model assembly, we're layering on the dot module model file, those listed changes and those changes only. And then depending on which platform we're targeting, whether it's .win or .web, we do the module.win or module.web model file on top of that, then the .win or .web product on top of that, and then finally the last set of changes applied are actually the user changes. So if the user decides to change column ordering or column sorting or manually change the detail view at runtime, those layers are then applied on top. So it really is a difference model being stacked on top of each other.
Right. Yeah, so as we were talking about the appearance rules, if we come into the BO model and find our object, there's just a node here called appearance rules where I could add my own and set everything up through the model. So since we're already here, might as well do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our criteria here. We're going to say where ship to billing equals true. And when that happens, we want our target item of shipping address. We want the visibility of that property to be hidden.
So as long as that object you're on satisfies that criteria, you can start applying those appearances. Back color, fore color, the font style, whether or not it's enabled or whether you hide it altogether.
So another attribute that we want to add that will work with that is the
Immediate post data.
immediate post data. Yes, sir.
So normally when you change a property value, it doesn't actually take effect until that property editor loses focus. So if you were typing in a name and you click tab to go to the next field, that's when that editor change would happen. What the immediate post data does is it actually watches for the control value change. So when the control is actually affected at the UI level, so as soon as you click there, it instantly takes effect. Whereas if we didn't have the immediate post data, you could check that off. You would have to click on something else first before that went away.
Yeah, and you can see since I already had it set on the Google company, it's already removed as soon as we load it up. Yeah, so now we're just going to do our second one. We'll show you that by doing it in the company contact as an attribute. Do appearance.
So you'll see here, because the appearance attribute is specific to that conditional appearance module, we have to resolve it. But now we can define all the attributes we want of this attribute. That's not confusing. We can assign all the values of that attribute right here in the class itself. We like this because when you want to figure out what's happening with this object, if something seems to be misbehaving for whatever reason, it's one place to go and look for all the pieces that are affecting this object is right in the object itself.
So in this case, our criteria is just where active equals true. For the target items, we're going to do everything. And all we're going to do in this case is change the font style. We're going to make everything bold.
Now by default, this appearance attribute will work in both list and detail views. You do have the option to target it to one or the other, or even custom context.
Oh, and I missed a bracket. There we go. Alright, so I can open up my company contact here, and we can say that Frank is active. And when you select active, it makes all of the properties bold. As Dave mentioned, it's not specific to the detail or the list view. You can see that it happens in both. We save that. Again, it happens on our full company contact list as well.
So what happens if you create a new contact right now?
Right.
So the active isn't actually enabled.
Right.
So how do we set the enabled?
So what we're going to do is go into our company contact class, and in the after construction, this is what runs when you first create an object. So in here, we'll just do that active equals true. And when we run it again, now when we create a contact, that will automatically be checked off.
So the after construction is only when it's created the first time, not every time it loads.
That's correct, yeah. Yep, so now as we start typing, it will be bold as well.
So just using attributes, we've managed to completely customize the way the application works using that underlying functionality. There's no need to reinvent the wheel to do a lot of this stuff. But now we might get into a point where we actually want to do something fully custom. So to do that, we can actually create our own controllers and our own actions. So why don't we do something like create a meeting directly from the company as a separate action?
Okay. And so for this, we're going to create a new controller.
Now again, the controllers can be either platform specific or they can be platform agnostic. So if we can make the controller platform agnostic, we absolutely will. Now you notice that the controller name that Adam's put in here is quite long. There's nothing wrong with using long names as long as they're descriptive.
Okay, so now that our controller has been created, by default it opens up to the design view. And from the toolbox on the left, we want to add an action. And you can see that there's 4 kinds in here. So the simple action is just a button. Your single choice action allows you to pick an item from a drop-down. Your parameterized action allows you to enter some data and submit it. And the pop-up window show action will show a view and a pop-up dialog with OK and cancel buttons. So in our case, that's what we want. And down in the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to set some of the properties here. So our name and ID here is going to be action create meeting. And we'll just set our caption as well. Just say create meeting.
So we always start our action names with the word action, simply so that when we go and try to find the actions that we've created, say in the model file, they're all listed at the top.
Right. For the image name, we're going to use another one that's included in the XAF framework, which is just the BO_scheduler. This is actually the same icon that our meeting's using. And then for the event, we want to use the customize pop-up window params.
Okay, so now we've scoped this controller down to our company. We can have a look at the pieces behind the controller to see what we have access to. So if we bring up a list of properties, the four major ones we want to deal with are the application. So that gives us access to all the kind of fundamental pieces that build this application. This is the WinForms, the web forms. We don't really care. It's an iXAF application. We then have the frame. And the frame is what we consider kind of the glue. It's where the view lives. It's where the template that shows the view lives. It's where all the controllers become accessible. So if we want to do access some different controllers, we do that through the frame. We then have the object space. And so an object space is basically your connection to the database, essentially. Your entire transaction, your entire lifespan of this view and these objects live within that object space. And every view has to have its own object space. That being said, if you're showing a nested view, so a view that belongs to another view, you can use what's called a nested object space. And we're going to use that here as well. And the last piece, of course, is the view itself. That's the last major one. So the view is the view we're currently looking at. That view has a current object, which in this case being the detail view. We know it's going to be a company. So the first thing we're going to do here, if we want to try to show a meeting detail view, is we're going to grab the company that we want to associate to that meeting. So we're simply grabbing the view.currentObject and casting it as a company. And if we didn't scope this controller down, that line obviously would fail. So that scoping is really important. So next we're going to create that object space. We're going to use a nested object space based on the current controller's object space. We can do that either through the view.objectSpace or just object space, doesn't really matter. The next thing we're doing is creating our meeting object. And we want to do that in the new object space. One of the very important rules of an object space is that they're not allowed to mix. So you're not allowed to use objects from a different object space in your object space. You have to pass that object space through first. So you're going to see here we've created that meeting in a new object space. Now we want to set the meeting.company to the company that's part of the current view. In order to do that, we have to pass it through using that get object. So we're saying, hey, new object space, go and get the object of company. Here's the company I want you to go get. In the background, it does its little query magic and pulls in that company for us. And the last thing we want to do is tell the parameters of this action, hey, this is the view we want to create. And so the e.view we're going to assign by asking the application to create a detail view for us. So we're doing application.create detail view, we're passing the object space, and we're passing the object we want it to actually show. And that should be enough. We should be able to run this and have our action work. And because we did the pop-up window show action, it's going to pop up in that pop-up window by default with that OK and cancel button.
All right, so you can see now that we're on the detail view of our company, the create meeting button is in our ribbon. When we click on that, just like Dave said, it pops up in this new view with the company set. So I'll just accept that, go to OK. And you can see now that the save button is activated. So this is because we used that nested object space. So I could still cancel right now and it would delete that meeting or never actually commit it to the database. But in this case, we'll just save it.
Okay, so now let's create a controller that works with a specific view, like the detail view, directly.
So the one that we're going to create will actually be Windows specific. So we're going to do it in the .module.win project. And instead of using the template gallery, I'm just going to go ahead and show you how you can create it just from a class. So here we're going to do the web link controller.
And so the idea behind this is to highlight the URL on the company?
Right. So it'll highlight the URL so that it's blue and underlined. And then if you double click on that control, it'll open up the website for you.
So this is actually accessing the control directly on the detail view.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so what happened here?
So what I'm using is a view controller, but using the generic implementation of it so that it knows that it's a detail view. So I don't need to scope it down to a detail view. This is just another way of doing that.
So a view normally could be a list view, a detail view, a dashboard view, or something else.
That's correct. So in the constructor, I'm going to scope it down to the object type. And again, we're going to do this one on company. And since we're working with the control directly, we want to do the override for on-view controls created. And in here, we're going to get a string property editor. It's going to be the website editor. Do that because we've already scoped it down. So view now in this case, as you can see here, is always going to be a detail view, and that's because of this generic implementation of it.
Now there's also another generic implementation where we can say it's an object view controller and specify the view type and the object type up in that generic definition.
So now that we have the editor, we want to see if the website editor.control does not equal null. We'll actually do that as well to check for the editor itself. And so the control here you can see is a text edit. And what we're going to do is just change the font. We'll give it an underline. And set the fore color to be blue. So the other thing that we need to do is handle the controls, subscribe to the controls double click. And then, so we know that the sender is going to be a text edit from the extra editors. And then we want to do the system.diagnostics.process.start. Just pass the edit.text. And so since we subscribe to this event, we want to make sure that we unsubscribe from it. This is a very common thing that we see. A lot of people will subscribe to events but always forget to unsubscribe, and that can lead to huge memory leaks on a bigger scale. So here we want to make this a class variable. And then in the deactivated, so we're going to override on deactivated if the website editor control does not equal null, we will just unsubscribe.
So essentially during the garbage collection, if we try to dispose of something that already or is still being held through another reference, it's not going to dispose properly. So that's why that unsubscription is very important.
Mm-hmm. Alright, so now you can see that the website has been colored blue and underlined, and if I go ahead and double click on it, it will open up the DevExpress website here. Alright, so there's one more controller that we wanted to show, and in this one we're going to bold the column headers of all of the list views. So it will work for the nested list views here and also for the root list views.
Okay, so we're going to create another controller. We'll do the same thing rather than use the template gallery. We'll just create another class. So in this case, we're going to scale it down or scope it down to a list view only rather than a detail view. And so list views have an editor property, and that's really the editor that displays the control. So whether it be a grid control or the scheduler control, those are all done by different editors. And because we're not doing this on a particular object type, we're just setting the list view and it's going to run on every list view. So again, we want to access when the grid view controls are created. So we're going to hope that the editor exists and that the control has been created on our behalf, which it should have at this point. There are scenarios primarily on the detail view side of things where you're expecting, on the view controls created, that every control is created for every property editor. That's not actually the case. There is a little bit of lazy loading that does happen. On the list view side, though, if the controller has been activated and the view controls created event has been thrown or raised, right, it should have the editor ready to go for us. And so what happened here is we've grabbed that grid list editor. We're assuming that's the type we're working with, but it could be schedule editor or some different type of list editor. So we do have to do that meld check. And then we're going in and accessing the underlying control of that editor, which should be our grid view. And we're going to set that font property to be bold. And because we're not subscribing to any events in this case, we don't need the on deactivated.
Yeah, so it's pretty subtle, but you can tell that the column headers now are bold. Yeah, so I think that is it as far as our controllers and the Windows side of things go. But let's actually open up the web application as well. So to do that, we're just going to go into the .web and update the web config to point to the same database. And we want to also right-click the .web and set that as our startup project. So even though we haven't done anything web specific, you'll still see that everything that we did in the .module project is brought forward into this application.
There we go. So it looks extremely similar to the Windows version. Mm-hmm. Again, we're in the company list view. We can go into the edit mode and see the detail view. That immediate post data attribute that we put on top of that ship to billing does force a little post back, and that recreates our view for us with the conditional appearance rule. The nested list of contacts, all that works the same. Same thing with the object spaces, whether it's a root object space or nested object space. If you head over to the meeting list.
I just wanted to point out that we also have the create meeting button up here. And it slides out that view instead of popping it up. So it's still nested within that.
And then your primary contact should still be filtered as well. Yeah. What happens if you go and change that company now? So this is occurring because we didn't put the immediate post data on that company property. So more importantly on the web, like I said, if you, like the Windows side accommodated for it pretty well. But on the website, if that immediate post data isn't specified, it's not going to do that callback.
So one thing that we haven't mentioned, we haven't been worrying about the database at all. So why don't we open up the SQL Management Studio and just take a look at what we've created here. So let's go into the database and we'll check out the company contact table. So under columns we have our primary key, which is a unique identifier, and then we've got all of the other properties that we added. So you can see that our string properties have a character limit of 100, but you can also add an attribute to change that, to increase the size or decrease it to whatever you'd like. Then we have our XPO specific fields, which are optimistic lock and the GC record. So the optimistic lock is just used by the locking mechanism in XPO, and the GC record is used instead of deleting records out of the database completely. It'll just set a value to this GC record field, and then it won't be brought into any of the queries. You can also see that under keys and indexes, these are created for us as well.
Good. You'll also see the XP object type table down below. And so this is XPO specific. Essentially when you have multiple classes that inherit from the same base, so in our case we did event and meeting. This table describes the object type that's being used on the UI side. So when we go and open up a meeting, even though we don't have a meeting table, our event table will have a column called object type, which will reference this ID. And so if I had multiple different types inheriting from event, it would know to go and pull either from the meeting table or a different type of event table we've looked at. Okay, so that's basically it for the database side of things. We didn't have to think about it too much, which is great. It's important to realize that the applications that we've created are just standard Windows and web applications in .NET. So anything you can typically do in those types of applications, you can also do in an XAF-based application as well. There are preferred ways to do things with XAF. So in terms of creating different views or different editors, creating a property editor or creating a list editor. Usually it's an easier way to still use the existing features of XAF while implementing your own custom changes. In terms of getting help on kind of getting started with the next pieces, certainly hit up the DevExpress website, head over to that support section and search the knowledge base articles. There's a beautiful forum here. You can also create your own tickets, and the DevExpress support team is amazing at getting back to you with insightful answers. If you find that the search for articles is not as robust as you would hope for, certainly head over to Google and enter site:/devexpress.com and then do your search, and it'll be a little more familiar in terms of getting back your Google web results. We typically stick to this ourselves. So also with the XAF community, they are a very tight-knit group of people. There are lots of community resources out there and people who can help you out. So certainly get involved in that as much as you can. Head over to the social media sites. There are LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter groups that you can follow along with as well, and really keep up to date with what's going on.
That's it for this session. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dave and Adam. If you'd like to learn more about XAF, you can watch more videos from our playlist or check out the documentation on our website. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified whenever we release new content. Thanks for watching, and thank you for choosing DevExpress.